Greetings everyone. Now, one of my favourite kind of lenses in the world are fast standard zoom lenses for APS-C cameras. Those crop sensor cameras are so useful for video work, and having a flexible zoom lens with a maximum aperture of f2.8 lets you shoot both video and stills with a nice bit of creative freedom. I have such fond memories of buying my first one, the old Canon EFS 17-55mm lens back in South Korea, and taking it everywhere with me, and recently I got a bit overexcited about Sony's excellent new 16-55mm f2.8 lens. Although at $1,300 it is ridiculously expensive, especially for a lens without image stabilization. Well, watch out, here come Tamron with a far more affordable option and a very impressive zoom range and its own image stabilization, their new 17-70mm f2.8 Di III-A VC RXD. It costs $800 or about £780 here in the UK. It's for Sony's E-mount mirrorless cameras and offers an APS-C image circle. Here is what you'll see if you mount it onto full frame, so obviously you'll want to shoot in crop mode. What a great zoom range though for an f2.8 lens. That is the full frame equivalent of about 25 to 105mm. Really handy. It all sounds too good to be true. Can this lens possibly be any good, or in reaching for the stars, will it just fall back down to earth with a crash like so much Chinese rocket booster? Well, let's find out. I'd like to thank Tamron UK for loaning me a copy of this lens for a few weeks for testing, although as usual this is a totally independent review. The lens's build quality is absolutely typical for a modern Tamron device. It's mostly made of plastic, but it still manages to feel fairly solid and tightly assembled. It's based on a metal lens mount with a weather sealing gasket around the edge. The lens's body has only two control points. First comes a plastic focus ring, which turns reasonably smoothly and responds well with the focus motor to being turned. As you can see here, the good news for video makers is that the lens displays very little focus breathing. I did also test to see if it's parfocal. Unfortunately not though, as your focus point will shift just a little as you zoom in and out. The lens's autofocus motor is averagely fast, accurate, and almost completely silent. As I mentioned, the lens features its own image stabilization system, or VC as they call it. That is a wise decision from Tamron, as not all of Sony's APS-C cameras feature their own in-body stabilization yet. You have to turn it on and off in your camera's menu. Here's some footage with the stabilization turned off and now turned on. As you can see here, it's doing quite a good job. There's just a little bit of jitteriness here, but it is holding your image decently still, which will be useful both for stills and video work. Next comes a rubberized zoom ring. It turns nice and smoothly without really any stickiness to it, again useful for video work. The lens's filter thread size is 67mm wide, which is becoming the standard for Tamron lenses now, and it comes with a small plastic hood also. Overall, while the lens doesn't feel like it's carved out of granite, it's still solid and all its electronics work really well. It'll be a good option for run and gun video work. Although one slight concern I noticed is that the front element of this copy of the lens seemed to have gathered a little dust behind it, so the lens might have a bit of a dust sealing weakness somewhere in there. Alright, let's move on and look at the all-important image quality. I am testing it here on a Sony a5100 camera with its 24MP APS-C sensor. In-camera corrections are turned on. At 17mm, straight from f2.8, sharpness and contrast are perfect in the middle of the image. Over in the corners, the image isn't quite as good, but it's still impressively sharp. A little purple colour fringing can be seen on contrasting edges here. f4, f5.6 and f8 all look about the same. Stop all the way down to f16 and a little softness begins to creep in due to the effects of diffraction. Let's zoom in a bit now to 35mm. At f2.8, again, sharpness and contrast are excellent in the middle. Here though, at 35mm, the corner image quality is virtually as good, with no visible colour fringing. That's great. Stopping down to f4 brings a little extra edge of resolution into the corners. The lens stays this sharp down to f11 again. Let's zoom all the way in to 70mm now. At f2.8, we finally see a slight weakness. Image sharpness remains good in the middle, but contrast is a bit low here, with a little ghosting visible on contrasting edges. Image quality is just as good in the corners, so at least we don't see a deterioration there. Stop down to f4, and we see a slight improvement in contrast in those corners. Back in the middle, we now see an excellent performance again, though. f5.6 looks just as great in the middle, and now the corners look noticeably sharper too. The image stays this sharp down to f11. So overall, if we don't take into account the performance at 70mm and f2.8, the lens's image quality is truly impressive. Very sharp from corner to corner with good contrast, which is great to see on a fast standard zoom lens with a longer than usual zoom range, a very difficult thing to design. And even at 70mm, the image quality is hardly bad, and stopping the lens down sharpens things up considerably, so it's quite a forgivable weak point, I think, but one to bear in mind nevertheless. Alright, let's turn in-camera corrections off now, and take a look at distortion and vignetting. At 17mm, we see moderately strong barrel distortion, as expected, and darkness in the corners at f2.8. Stop down to f4, f5.6 and f8 to see that darkness gradually get pushed back into the corners. Zoom into 22mm and that distortion straightens out. At 70mm, that distortion flips into a quite strong pincushion shape, and again the corners suffer from vignetting. At f4 and f5.6, those corners brighten up again. So it's exactly the kind of performance you'd expect from a fast standard zoom lens here. You will need to keep your in-camera corrections turned on. This lens has a very cool bonus feature which I haven't mentioned yet, a close focus ability which lets you shoot very close to your subject indeed, whether you're zoomed in or zoomed out. At 17mm, that close-up image quality remains sharp at f2.8 and very sharp if you stop down to f4 for some dramatic close-up images. If you're shooting at 70mm, then your close-up image quality will be very soft at f2.8 with colour tinting. Stop down to f4, f5.6 or f8 to see gradual improvements that lead to excellent close-up image quality again, so bear all that in mind when getting your macro shots in. Now let's see how the lens performs against bright lights. At wide angles, we see little in the way of flaring. It's a pretty good performance there. Zoom in and the flaring gets a lot worse though, as you can see, so you'll want to avoid shooting right into any bright lights. And finally, bokeh, an important question on a fast standard zoom lens. Often these kind of lenses will struggle to give soft out-of-focus backgrounds, but not this one. Whether you're shooting at wide angles or telephoto, those backgrounds look impressively smooth with no ugliness or problems at all. Overall, well, I was so pleased by how this lens tested. Some aspects of its image quality may only be average distortion, vignetting and flaring. But in all other areas, the lens is surprisingly successful, even without taking into consideration the challenges Tamron faced in extending its zoom range beyond the normal. It is surprisingly sharp throughout the whole zoom and aperture range from corner to corner in your images, although you will want to stop down to f4 at 70mm for best results there. Its colours and contrast and its bokeh are all very nice, its build quality is decent, its autofocus and image stabilisation all work really well, coupled with the fact that its parameters make it one of the most useful and flexible lenses you could possibly own, and its very reasonable price, this lens absolutely comes highly recommended. I love making these reviews. Camera lenses are exciting but also expensive, so it's my pleasure to test them out for you all and help you in your purchase decisions. If you'd like to support this channel and enjoy sneak previews of upcoming reviews, as well as some exclusive content and special videos every month, then head on over to Patreon and join in the party over there. There's a link in the description below. See you next time.